For today's meditation, let us read from 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 1 to 8. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, "You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you. For surely they will turn away your heart after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. So he did for all his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods. Solomon's story began with extraordinary promise. God, in his love and grace, appeared to Solomon at the very start of his reign and granted him the wisdom he had humbly requested. With that wisdom, Solomon governed Israel with justice and mercy, following in his father David's footsteps. He undertook monumental tasks such as the construction of the temple, fulfilling the desire of his father. Solomon's early years were marked by obedience, dedication, and an unwavering heart toward God. However, the trajectory of Solomon's life did not remain the same. In the midpoint of his reign, God appeared to him again, graciously warning him of the dangers of turning away from him. Despite these divine interventions, Solomon's heart eventually drifted, especially during the latter years of his life. The king who started so well ended up making choices that led to his spiritual downfall. Long before Solomon came to power, God, foreseeing the potential pitfalls of kingship, laid down specific instructions for Israel's future kings through Moses. These guidelines, recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14 to 20, were meant to prevent kings from falling into the common temptations of power, wealth, and self-indulgence. In summary, God allowed Israel to appoint a king, but with important conditions. The king must be chosen by God and be one of their own, not a foreigner. He must not accumulate the excessive horses, especially by returning to Egypt to acquire them, for God had commanded that they should never go back that way. The king must not take many wives, as they could turn his heart away from God. He should avoid amassing excessive silver and gold, as riches could become a snare. Furthermore, every king was instructed to make a personal, handwritten copy of God's law, which should serve as a constant reminder of his commands. The king was to read this law daily so that he would learn to fear the Lord and not become prideful. This practice was to ensure that the king remained humble, obedient, and faithful to God, so that his reign would be long and prosperous for both himself and his descendants. Despite these clear instructions, Solomon eventually strayed from God's commands. The very things God warned about became the cause of his downfall. He amassed wealth, built a large army, and accumulated many wives, 700 wives and 300 concubines to be exact. Most of these women were foreign princesses whom he married to form political alliances. Over time, their influence caused Solomon to turn away from the one true God and follow after foreign gods like Ashtoreth, Milcom, and Chemosh. It is a tragic irony that wisdom Solomon received from God was not enough to safeguard him against spiritual decline. His wealth, power, and desire for political alliances led him into the very dangers God had warned kings against in Deuteronomy. Solomon's heart, once wholly devoted to God, became divided and distracted by the temptations of the world. Solomon's life is a sobering reminder that a good beginning is not enough. We may start our journey with passion, enthusiasm, and commitment to God, but we must remain vigilant throughout our lives. The daily demands of life, coupled with the subtle influence of the world around us, can easily erode our devotion to God if we are not careful. One of the safeguards God put in place for kings was a requirement to personally copy his law and read it daily. This was not just a formality. It was essential for maintaining a close relationship with God. The king was expected to reflect on God's commandments and internalize them, allowing them to shape his decisions, actions, and leadership. In our lives, we must take time to understand God's word. No matter how busy life becomes, we need to consistently seek God's guidance, immerse ourselves in his word, and rely on him daily. Our past experiences with God, no matter how profound, are not enough to sustain us for a lifetime. Just as Solomon needed to continually depend on God, so do we. Solomon's reign serves as a warning for us all. A good beginning is not sufficient if it is not sustained by ongoing obedience and devotion to God. Solomon had everything: wisdom, wealth, power, and favor with God, but he allowed his heart to be turned away from God. His fall shows us that no one is immune to spiritual decline, no matter how strong they start. It is essential for us to guard our hearts against anything that may lead us away from God. Whether it is wealth, relationships, or worldly ambitions, we must remain steadfast in our commitment to him. And Jesus said, no one can serve two masters. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. We are called to give our whole heart to God, not just at the beginning, but for the entirety of our lives. Let Solomon's story be a reminder that we must be vigilant and remain dependent on God, ensuring that our hearts are continually aligned with his will. It is a good beginning is not enough. It is how we finish that truly matters. After reading many proverbs that he had written, it is easy to realize that he had a firm understanding of what God desires from a man. He could have argued with anyone in the world and convinced him of the folly of going after many women. There were many commands that were broken. He failed to recognize God's wisdom of one man, one woman in the beginning. Secondly, God through Moses had told them not to marry from the nations around them. He also told him the reason. You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they be with you, for surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Thirdly, he shall not acquire many wives for himself, that his heart turn away. Fourthly, about gold and silver, that you shall not require for himself excessive gold. Fifthly, about acquiring horses and chariots, that he must not acquire many horses for himself. It will cause the people to turn to Egypt in order to acquire them. It is one thing to know things in our mind and another thing to know it in our heart. We may believe God in our minds, but in our hearts we could say that there is no God when we willfully disobey him in the clear commandments that he has given. The fool says in his heart, not in his mind, that there is no God. Solomon's heart was turned away from God because of his many marriages with foreign women. One cannot join oneself with someone in marriage and be separate from their influence. They turned his heart away from God to worship gods that were abominable and engage in abominable practices. His bad example set the tone for many of his descendants to follow his example and eventually being taken into captivity. A rocket misaligned slightly in the launching pad will miss the target by thousands of miles as it moves forward. We have to be extremely vigilant to what God says, even in small matters of life. In the end of his life, God raised 3 adversaries, 2 foreign and a fellow Israelites. Prophesied to tear his kingdom into 2 and give the majority of it to his servants. Solomon's bad end is a sober warning. If this was the case with the wisest man who ever lived, then what hope do we have apart from the constant dependence upon Jesus Christ? Let the example of Solomon drive us to greater dependence upon and abiding with Jesus. God bless.